My uncle convinced me to invest $35,000 in his guaranteed business venture. 5 months later, I discovered he'd spent it all on gambling. I hired a forensic accountant, traced every transaction, and had him arrested for investment fraud. He's now serving 5 years and owes me $65,000 in restitution. I, 32M, trusted my uncle with everything. He was family, and when he came to me with what he called a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I believed him without question. My uncle had always been the charismatic one in the family. Growing up, he was the guy who showed up to every holiday with expensive gifts and stories about his latest ventures. My parents looked up to him. My grandparents practically worshipped him. He had this way of making everything sound effortless, like success just followed him around. When I started working as an engineering consultant 3 years ago, he was the first person to congratulate me. He told me I had a good head on my shoulders, that I reminded him of himself at my age. So when he approached me last year with his business proposal, I didn't hesitate. He explained that he was expanding his commercial real estate consulting firm and needed capital to secure a major contract with a development company. The numbers he showed me looked solid. 20% returns within 8 months. He had spreadsheets, projected timelines, even testimonials from supposed clients. He told me this was how he'd built his wealth, and now he was giving me a chance to build mine. I handed over $35,000. It was most of my savings, money I'd been setting aside for a down payment on a house. But my uncle assured me this investment would accelerate those plans. He even drew up a contract, signed it in front of me, and promised quarterly updates. The first 2 months, he sent brief emails. Everything was progressing smoothly, he said. The contract was moving through approval phases. I should expect my first return payment by month 4. I trusted him completely. Month 3, the email stopped. I called him twice. The first time, he apologized and said he'd been swamped with meetings. The second time, he sounded irritated and told me I needed to be patient. Real estate deals took time. I felt embarrassed for pushing, so I backed off. By month 5, I couldn't reach him at all. His phone went straight to voicemail. His office number was disconnected. I drove to his house one evening and found it dark, his car missing from the driveway. His wife answered the door looking exhausted, and when I asked about him, she said he was traveling for business. She closed the door before I could ask anything else. Something felt wrong. I went home and started digging through the contract he'd given me. That's when I noticed the business name he'd used didn't match any registered LLC in our state. I searched online and found nothing. No website, no business listings, no evidence this consulting firm even existed. I felt sick. I called my cousin, his daughter, and asked if she knew anything about her father's business dealings. There was a long pause before she told me I should talk to her mother. When I pressed, she admitted her parents had been fighting constantly about money. Her father had developed a gambling problem over the past year. She didn't know details, but she'd overheard arguments about debts and casinos. I sat in my apartment that night staring at the wall. $35,000. Gone. Gambled away by someone I'd trusted like a second father. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer. She was direct and blunt. I had a contract, which was good, but proving fraud would require evidence showing he'd never intended to invest the money. She recommended hiring a forensic accountant to trace where my money had actually gone. It would cost me another few thousand, but without it, I'd have no case. I hired the accountant that week. His name was Richard, a middle-aged man who specialized in financial fraud cases. He requested my uncle's bank statements, which I obtained through a subpoena my lawyer filed. What Richard uncovered over the next 3 weeks made my blood run cold. Every single dollar of my $35,000 had been deposited into my uncle's personal checking account. Within days, the money started flowing out in chunks. $2,000 here, $5,000 there, all to casinos within a 100-mile radius. ATM withdrawals at gambling establishments. Wire transfers to offshore betting sites. Not a single penny had gone toward any business venture. There was no real estate contract. No development company. Nothing. Richard traced additional transactions showing my uncle had been lying to his family too. He'd taken out a second mortgage on his house, maxed out for credit cards, borrowed money from his own retirement account. He was drowning in gambling debt, and my investment had been his latest attempt to stay afloat. I felt betrayed on a level I couldn't articulate. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about someone who'd sat at my dinner table, who'd given me advice about my career, who'd pretended to care about my future while systematically robbing me. My lawyer said we had enough for both a civil suit and criminal charges. She explained that investment fraud carried serious penalties, especially when the perpetrator had used family relationships to gain trust. I asked what would happen to him if we pursued criminal charges. She said he could face 5 to 10 years depending on the judge and his prior record. I thought about my aunt, my cousin, the rest of my family who would inevitably take sides. But then I thought about my empty savings account and the house I wouldn't be buying. I thought about how he'd ignored my calls when I started asking questions, how he'd hidden behind his wife when I showed up at his door. I told my lawyer to file everything. The police arrested him 2 weeks later. I wasn't there, but my cousin called me sobbing, asking how I could do this to her father. I wanted to explain, to make her understand, but she hung up before I could speak. My aunt left me a voicemail calling me vindictive and cruel. My mother, his sister, stopped talking to me entirely. The preliminary hearing was brutal. My uncle showed up in an expensive suit, looking confident and wronged. His lawyer argued that this was a misunderstanding between family members, that my uncle had fully intended to invest the money, but circumstances had changed. He painted me as impatient and vengeful, someone weaponizing the legal system over a simple business dispute. Then Richard took the stand. He walked the court through every transaction, every casino visit, every lie. He showed how my uncle had deposited my check and started gambling with it within 48 hours. He presented evidence of similar patterns with other people's money, including funds my uncle had borrowed from friends under false pretenses. The prosecutor asked my uncle directly if he'd ever established the real estate consulting firm mentioned in the contract. My uncle hesitated, then admitted he hadn't. He claimed he'd planned to, but things had gotten complicated. The judge asked him to explain where my $35,000 had gone. My uncle looked at the floor and said nothing. Update 1. The trial lasted 3 days. My uncle's lawyer tried everything. He brought in character witnesses who talked about my uncle's generosity and history of helping family members. He argued that gambling addiction was a disease and my uncle needed treatment, not prison. He even suggested I was partially responsible for not conducting proper due diligence before investing. But the evidence was overwhelming. Richard had documented everything. The prosecution presented bank statements, casino records, and testimony from 2 other people my uncle had defrauded in similar schemes. One was a former business partner who'd lost $20,000. Another was a family friend who'd invested $15,000 in what my uncle claimed was a tech startup. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts of investment fraud. The sentencing hearing was 2 months later. I sat in the back of the courtroom watching my uncle stand before the judge. He'd lost weight. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame. When the judge asked if he wanted to make a statement, my uncle apologized. He said he'd made terrible mistakes and hurt people he cared about. He talked about his gambling addiction and how it had destroyed his judgment. He cried, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Then the judge spoke. She said this wasn't just about gambling addiction. This was about calculated deception. My uncle had created fake documents, forged business credentials, and exploited family relationships for personal gain. He'd shown no remorse until facing consequences. She sentenced him to 5 years in state prison. The restitution hearing happened a week later. My lawyer had calculated damages including the original $35,000 plus interest, legal fees, and the cost of the forensic accounting. The total came to $65,000. The judge ordered my uncle to pay the full amount, though my lawyer warned me that actually collecting it would be difficult. His assets were already being liquidated to cover his other debts. My aunt filed for divorce 3 months into his sentence. My cousin sent me a letter apologizing for her initial reaction. She said she'd been in denial about her father's problems, but couldn't ignore the evidence anymore. She'd attended some of the trial and heard the testimony from his other victims. She told me she understood why I'd done what I did, even though it had torn the family apart. My mother still won't speak to me. Half the family thinks I'm justified. The other half thinks I should have handled it privately, that airing family problems in court was cruel and unnecessary. Holidays are awkward now. I get invited to some gatherings and excluded from others. I've received $14,000 in restitution so far. It comes in small payments every few months as the court garnishes my uncle's prison wages and liquidates his remaining assets. My lawyer says I'll likely recover about 30% of what I'm owed over the next decade. The house I'd been saving for is still years away. People ask if I regret pressing charges. The honest answer is complicated. I don't regret holding him accountable. He stole from me and others without remorse. He would have continued if he hadn't been stopped. But I didn't anticipate how completely it would fracture my family. I didn't realize I'd be choosing between justice and relationships I'd valued my entire life. Some days I wonder if there was another way. If I'd confronted him differently, demanded repayment privately, maybe he would have gotten help and avoided prison. Maybe my family would still be intact. But then I remember Richard's findings. The multiple victims. The years of deception. This wasn't a one-time mistake driven by addiction. This was a pattern. My uncle calls from prison occasionally. I've never answered. He writes letters that I don't open. My aunt forwarded one to me last year saying he wanted to apologize properly, that he'd been attending addiction counseling and understood the harm he'd caused. Part of me wants to hear what he has to say. Another part thinks it doesn't matter anymore. I've learned things about trust one wish I didn't know. I've learned that family doesn't automatically mean safety. I've learned that people who seem successful and generous can be desperate and destructive beneath the surface. I've learned that doing the right thing often costs more than you expect. The $35,000 represented more than savings. It represented years of careful planning, of saying no to things I wanted so I could build towards something bigger. My uncle didn't just steal money. He stole time and security and the naive belief that people who love you won't hurt you. He gets out in 2 years. I don't know what happens then. Whether he'll try to contact me. Whether my family will expect reconciliation. Whether the remaining restitution payments will continue. My lawyer says he'll be on probation and required to maintain steady employment, which should help with collections. But she's also realistic about how many fraud victims never see full repayment. I've moved on in practical ways. I got a promotion at work. I'm saving again, slower this time, but steadier. I've started dating someone who knows the whole story and doesn't judge me for how it ended. But there's a guardedness now that wasn't there before. A hesitation when people offer opportunities that sound too good. A habit of asking questions that probably seem paranoid. Was it worth it? I sent a man to prison and destroyed family relationships. I'll recover maybe half my money over years of small payments. I'm known as the nephew who turned on his uncle, depending on who's telling the story. But he's also known now as the uncle who defrauded multiple people, including his own family. His other victims got their justice too. His gambling addiction is being treated, whether he wanted treatment or not. And maybe, somewhere down the line, he won't do this to someone else. I think about the person I was before all this. The trusting 32-year-old who believed family meant protection. I can't be that person anymore. But maybe the person I've become, the one who asks hard questions and demands accountability even when it hurts, maybe that person was necessary all along. The money will come back slowly or not at all. The family relationships may never heal. My uncle will serve his time and either change or he won't. But I know I didn't let someone steal from me without consequences. I know I stood up when it mattered, even though standing up meant standing alone. Some lessons cost $35,000 and 5 years of someone else's freedom. This one cost both, and I'm still not sure if I passed or failed. I just know I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd done nothing. If you like this story, please like this video and subscribe us for more such real-life-based stories. Thanks in advance.